Okay, as I'm sure most of you are aware by now, on October 25th, 2024, Joe Rogan released the podcast that he recorded with former President Donald Trump. And this event was the culmination of so much psychological priming that the media had done in the prior 2 decades. It was the crescendo of so many different narratives that had slowly been building over time. But before getting into any of that, I want to focus on what Donald Trump did after this interview. Specifically, he gave a speech in Traverse City, Michigan. And it was delayed by a few hours because the podcast with Joe Rogan ran longer than expected. And knowing how these things tend to work, there might be some larger symbolic meaning in the time delay and the time he actually started speaking, and something along those lines perhaps transpired, but I didn't look too deeply into it. I stopped at the fact that the speech was given in Traverse City. And to give you an idea of what I mean here, let's refresh our memory regarding the context that all of this is taking place within. Symbolically speaking, Donald Trump is the twin of 9/11, a Gemini born under a total lunar eclipse in 1946. In that respect, he is the moon child that was imbued with the result of a magical ritual that had the effect of pulling on the water, like the moon pulls on the water. And in this way, Donald Trump is a magnetic character that is able to pull on people's emotions and disorient them. Whether you love him or you hate him or you're somewhere in the middle, he draws your attention in. In this way, he's a talisman for the magical ritual. An agent of chaos that they will establish order through. And as this moonchild, they scripted his entire life leading up to the point where he would be elected president in the early morning hours of November 9th, 2016, or 9/11. In this way, he is the twin of 9/11, the twin of the event that took place in New York City on September 11th, 2001. That destructive event where they destroyed those 2 towers and raised one from its ashes is mirrored by Donald Trump, who is 9/11 personified. He is that event personified into a person in terms of what he is being used to do to the country itself. You could view him as the charges that they placed in those buildings to detonate them. Donald Trump is the charges. His movement that they have artificially created through him are all of the little individual charges sitting in people's heads that will eventually blow when they are triggered and result in the destruction of the United States of America. Now, you're thinking of an event like 9/11, but it'll probably be something much more slow in terms of how we see it unfold. Empires don't go out overnight. It takes a very long time for them to decay. But Donald Trump is accelerating that process. So along those lines, remember that in February of this year, 2024, Donald Trump gave a speech in Eagle Pass, Texas. And there were a couple interesting coincidences surrounding this speech. Number one, Eagle Pass, Texas just so happened to be the first city or town that the path of totality from the April 8th total solar eclipse would pass through. Which is another way of saying that the eclipse, where the moon covers the sun temporarily, started in Eagle Pass, Texas. And Donald Trump, coincidence number 2, gave that speech on a leap day in a leap year, because 2024 just so happened to be a leap year. And he gives this speech in Eagle Pass, Texas on a leap day. When you put that in the context of what he symbolically represents, you start to get an idea of why he gave that speech in that town on that day, because he represents the leap in evolution in terms of what they are going to do through him to the United States of America and how that will play into the larger agenda for the world as a whole, which is why they gave him his own monolith right next to the United Nations monolith. Donald Trump's monolith is overlooking the United Nations in the same way that the Millennium Hilton monolith overlooked Ground Zero at 9/11. And as those monoliths are generally understood, going back to the book where they first appeared, written by Arthur C. Clarke, they represent leaps in evolution, which is why symbolically in the media, Donald Trump was associated with quantum leaps and dark matter and all of these similar concepts that relate to some kind of evolutionary jump, a Stargate, as it were. So, all of that said, check this out. Donald Trump goes on the Joe Rogan podcast on October 25th, 2024. Later that night, he appears in Traverse City, Michigan, with a black Make America Great Again hat on. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is what is referred to as the dark MAGA meme. And as they say in this article here, Donald Trump has seemingly come out in full support of the dark MAGA alt-right conspiracy movement with his latest campaign swag. The GOP presidential nominee arrived at his rally in Traverse City, Michigan on Friday, sporting a MAGA cap that was blacked out with gold accents instead of its usual red. The style, seen on Elon Musk and other diehard Trump supporters, has become a dog whistle of sorts for people who believe that Trump must return to the White House at all costs, even if by force. The Tesla CEO and billionaire gleefully told the audience at Trump's last rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, that he was not just MAGA, he added, pointing to a blacked out MAGA hat, "I'm dark MAGA." And that's a whole separate thing. We might get to Elon Musk later, but not a coincidence that he took over Twitter when he did, because it's all a part of this agenda to mainstream conspiracy culture in a way that they can point their finger at it and censor it, which will in effect censor free speech in the United States of America. The whole point is to get rid of the First Amendment. That's what all of this is designed to do. So not an accident that Elon Musk takes over X and then later comes out in full support of Donald Trump and then joins his campaign overtly wearing a dark MAGA hat that is associated with quote-unquote alt-right conspiracy theorists and quote-unquote white nationalists. So, see the pattern here. Not only is Elon Musk merging directly into Donald Trump, but also now Joe Rogan has been merged directly into Donald Trump. It's overt now. They have been in the same room together or on the same stage together. Before, it was just loose correlations in the collective mind where they would point out how Elon Musk was promoting misinformation, how Joe Rogan was promoting misinformation, and of course how Donald Trump was promoting misinformation. That was all being done kind of under the surface, and they were loosely associating them with the right. Joe Rogan is on the right. Elon Musk is on the right. Donald Trump is a Republican. It's all loosely associated, and then boom, now it's overt in everyone's face. No, now these are all real things that are transpiring in the actual world. They are together. It's the culmination of the ritual that's been going on. And as it relates to Elon Musk, you can see the reasoning for this right here. The For You tab on X is basically a 4chan message board. Yes, that's the entire point. This was designed way in advance to take place. This wasn't some accident. This wasn't Elon Musk taking over Twitter and then it just by accident happened that it turned into 4chan. No, it was always designed as a pipeline to mainstream 4chan and everything that has been associated with it so that speech could be censored in a very real way, as opposed to just banning the website, right? No, this will eventually result, when it's all said and done, in some kind of grand restriction of what you can say on the internet. I mean, I've always speculated that this is going to result someday in a driver's license for the internet. I mean, you're going to have to actually enter in your social security number to your ISP to even log on to the internet. And then every single thing you do or say is attached to you, right? And that will tie into the social credit score, the digital ID, and in that way, you're tracked everywhere you go, and you can never speak out in any way that would go against what is accepted, because that would result in your termination from society, right? So understand, that's where all of this is headed. We're just in the initial stages of it, or I suppose we're probably a little further along than initial stages at this point, but hopefully people are starting to see what's going on here. This is all on purpose, what is happening right now. X turned into 4chan by design. And then, by design, Elon Musk openly supported Donald Trump and joined his campaign. So that 4chan would become synonymous with Republican. And in that way, they take the old system of left and right and just update it to a 2.0 system that works on the internet now. Instead of the old days with cable TV where it was all the regular news stations and then Fox News, and you were a weird conservative if you've watched Fox News as opposed to the other ones, and shows like The Daily Show and Colbert Report would make fun of, Glenn Beck and Fox News and that whole thing. Well, this is the new version of that, where everyone who's cool and understands the truth makes fun of X, right? Because X is the Fox News. They've merged them together. They've mainstreamed it in that way. And I say all of this without even getting into who Elon Musk is and who his parents were and where he got all of his money. He's a front man for the military industrial complex. I always struggle when I use terms like military industrial complex, because that's a term that somebody just came up with, and it's not something that I came up with. I'm just repeating. It always bothers me when I repeat things that aren't original. But anyway, getting back to Donald Trump and Traverse City, I hope you see the symbolism there as it relates to Eagle Pass and the United States of America's association with eagles, and how that's working on multiple levels, right? You have the idea of an eagle passing or dying, the country dying. Donald Trump gives the speech on a leap day in Eagle Pass as this eclipse would later traverse through it, you see. And then he gives this speech after going on Joe Rogan's podcast and officially tying that thread together for everyone to see in Traverse City. And he comes out in the dark MAGA gear to the Undertaker's song. For those of you who don't know, in the old WWF and then later the WWE, there was a wrestler who went by the name The Undertaker. And he played this funeral procession music when he entered the ring. Okay? And Donald Trump came out in his dark MAGA gear with a golden tie on to the Undertaker theme a few hours after he gave this interview with Joe Rogan in Traverse City. Do you understand the symbolism there? It's the same as the Eagle Pass thing. Donald Trump represents traversing something, going over or through it, a quantum leap into something else. And in this case, it's the same as Eagle Pass. It's a funeral for America. You see? Okay. It's a literal funeral for America, symbolically speaking. And according to the Daily Dot, Trump wore a gold and black MAGA hat. Critics think it's a secret signal to the Proud Boys. Obviously, the Proud Boys is the government, right? I mean, you should know that by now. But that doesn't mean ordinary people aren't capable of being subsumed within it if they're naive and fall for the propaganda. That can happen. But the organization itself was created by the government. I mean, come on. You should all know this by now. But anyway, they go on here. Critics of former President Donald Trump believe he sent a secret signal to the far-right Proud Boys group this weekend after wearing a black and gold MAGA hat. The outfit, which also included a black suit and gold tie, was donned by Trump on Saturday at a rally in Michigan. And that's incorrect. I believe it was Friday. Or maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it took place after the Joe Rogan interview, which was on Friday. Though maybe because of the delay, it went into Saturday morning early. I don't know. Anyway, the imagery is already being labeled as fascist by left-leaning users on social media who say Trump's wardrobe choice was a clear nod to the militant organization. Trump is wearing black and yellow this weekend. These are the colors of the Proud Boys, one user wrote in a viral post. This is the first time in American history that a presidential candidate is purposely wearing gang colors. What message do you think he's trying to send? It's quite dramatic to refer to a suit as gang colors, but others noted that Trump wore the clothing just one day before his rally at New York City's Madison Square Garden. The event has been compared by Trump's critics to the pro-Nazi rally held at the same venue in 1939. The rally also came shortly after John Kelly, Trump's former White House chief of staff, claimed that Trump had previously praised Hitler. I mean, of course, that was leaked right in this window in time because it's all by design. These are scripted things that are put into the news because they all coordinate together to create the narrative that they're trying to bring to life in your mind. Trump, who almost always wears blue suits with red ties, wears Proud Boy colors the same weekend as his MSG rally, which they have associated with Hitler, which is then associated with the Proud Boys and this mythical white nationalist domestic terrorist movement that's taking place in the United States of America and that we really need to be worried about. And that, as my point earlier was alluding to, they will use eventually to create the conditions for the censorship that will remove the First Amendment in certain ways. I mean, it's not hard to see here, right? They're painting Trump as this Hitler figure, and look at what they did to Germany after they had the real Hitler. I mean, you literally can't say certain things in Germany or you will go to jail. And it's a similar idea here, what they will use Trump for in the future. What he will be referred to as in the history books as the example that we can never let happen again. So we have to prevent all these things that we can classify as misinformation and hate from being allowed to be spoken. Every neo-Nazi knows the significance of Trump's Madison Square Garden rally Sunday, channeling the famous 1939 Nazi rally held there. As a signal, last night Trump set aside his traditional blue suit and red tie in lieu of Proud Boys black and gold. He's getting the band back together. Trump also faced widespread backlash in 2020 after telling the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by after being asked to condemn extremist groups during a presidential debate. The Proud Boys were then heavily involved in the January 6th Capitol riot following Trump's loss to President Joe Biden. And along the same lines, you can see why they staged that quote-unquote insurrection now. Because it plays right into this narrative. It's slowly being built over time. Look at what this dangerous misinformation does. We really need to get control of this. And they're now openly saying this on the other side, that is, in controlled opposition to the Trump side. They're saying, hey, we have to just remove X from the internet. We have to remove Elon Musk from society. This is very dangerous. We have to jail Donald Trump. This is scary, right? And they tried to do that. Or at least they gave us the illusion that they were trying to do that. He was never going to jail. I mean, you have to understand, I actually have an image that I want to show along these lines, but you have to understand that Donald Trump knows who he is and he knows what his role is. And that's why he walks around with the swagger that he has, like no one can touch him. Because he's sort of the chosen one as it relates to the larger agenda. It will not work without him, and he knows that. And that should tell you everything you need to know about that alleged shooting that took out a part of his ear. That just so happened to take place at 6:11 p.m. or 9:11. What a coincidence. But that's why he walks around like that, because he knows what his role is. People think he's just a cocky person. No, he knows what he is destined to do in terms of the script, so it doesn't even register with him that anything could ever happen to him. So he says and does whatever he wants. And I'm sure maybe he has deviated from what the script writers want him to do in certain situations because he has that power. But this is the image that I was talking about. Witches complain they can't cast spells on Trump because he has some kind of protection around him. And I think this is probably very real. This guy is a magical entity that was created by forces so powerful we can't even really comprehend it. So he's protected from all the low-level witches on the left who want to try to cast a spell on him, these people who hate Trump so much, who are actual witches, I'm sure, and think they have power, and that's a whole different subject. They really don't have any power. It's all an illusion, but they try to cast these spells and they're like, we can't do anything to him. I don't understand. And it's like, yeah, because he's 1,000 levels above you in terms of what's been woven into him and infused into him in a very literal way into his being, and who controls him and has given him the power that he has. Like, yeah, of course he's protected from you. Of course you can't do anything to him. And he knows that, is my point. But anyway, check this out. Supporters of Trump say the accusations are nonsense. Instead, they argue the black suit was clearly a nod to the famous wrestler known as The Undertaker, real name Mark Calloway, who also wore a black suit during his career. Now, as somebody who has seen The Undertaker wrestle, you can't really call his outfit a black suit. His quote-unquote manager, the pallbearer, wore a black suit, but Undertaker had a wrestling outfit on. It wasn't a black suit. It was colored black, but it wasn't an actual suit. Anyway, there's your wrestling history for the day. But Trump appeared on Calloway's podcast 6 Feet Under on Monday prior to his weekend rallies. And when Trump walked on stage in Michigan, he played Calloway's signature ring entrance song, Funeral March, by famed composer Chopin. So let that sink in. A few days before the Joe Rogan podcast and this speech in Traverse City, and then his big rally in MSG that the media is painting as a Nazi Hitler-inspired rally, a few days before all of that, he's on 6 Feet Under, the podcast, with The Undertaker. Okay? Do you see what I'm saying there? Eagle Pass. 6 feet under. Symbolically, he represents the death of America. And very literally, he's engaging in a funeral ritual when he walks on stage a few hours after with the Joe Rogan interview that has like 30 million views at this point or something crazy like that. The Joe Rogan interview was the crescendo of all of this propaganda. And a few days before it, he's on the 6 Feet Under podcast. And then a few hours after it, he's doing the Traverse City speech, walking out to the Undertaker's theme. It's a literal funeral reenactment or a preview of the funeral that Donald Trump represents in relationship to America. And it's so funny how it works because the people who have the derangement syndrome and think this guy is actually a real person and not just acting out the things he's told to say and do and all that, the people who don't know this is scripted in advance are so deranged by him and they hate him so much that they would actually agree with what I just said. Like, yes, Donald Trump is the funeral for America. We can't let him win. It's like, no, you don't understand. They can't do the funeral without you and your mental energy. You're the one creating it. You have the charges in your mind. And if you diffuse the charges, it won't work. And that's the point of me doing this video. 6 Feet Under, Traverse City, Quantum Leap, Eagle Pass, Texas, The Moonchild and the Great American Eclipse. Operation Warp Speed. This is from MSNBC. Trump's MSG rally comes 85 years after pro-Nazi rally at famed arena. So that's just an idea of how the propaganda is working from this perspective. Oh, and I saw this on Reddit the other day. So if Trump wins, this thing we have both presidencies separately adding up to 9 and 11. Not too much there, but haven't seen this said yet, right? So 45 obviously adds up to 9 and 47 adds up to 11 if you add 4 and 5 and 4 and 7. And just this alone right here leads me to believe that the script says it'll be Donald Trump because that's too perfect, right? In terms of everything else that I've gone into. relating to Donald Trump being the personification of 9/11, the twin of that event, you would have his two presidencies adding up to 9/11 if he's elected as the 47th president. That's just too perfect. Oh, and this was from the New York Post endorsing Donald Trump. Choice is clear to put the nation on the right path, back to the future, with a giant picture of Donald Trump. I mean, there you go, right? If you ever had any doubt that all of this stuff we've been going into about Donald Trump and Back to the Future and 9/11, have no doubt anymore. This stuff is real, and they just showed it to you right here. I mean, it doesn't get more real than this. Unbelievable, right? I suppose I shouldn't have spent a half hour talking before I got to this. I buried the lead a little bit, but the pictures are all out of order. Yeah, Donald Trump and Back to the Future. There you go. And then this is from the New York Post as well. Majority of Americans believe the First Amendment goes too far. Poll. Now, I can tell you right now, this poll is completely fake because the majority of Americans do not believe that. That's ridiculous. But I hope you see the point that even the paper that is endorsing Donald Trump is then giving you the other side of the propaganda simultaneously that Donald Trump exists for, which is eventually censoring our ability to speak freely and say the truth of whatever the situation is. This is the end goal. I hope I've made that clear enough in all of my videos. Okay, now I think we're going to get into Elon Musk a little bit. Elon Musk is using his social media platform to promote misinformation about the presidential candidates in the lead up to the November election, amplifying false claims Wednesday about a Trump rally bomb threat and immigrants eating pets in Ohio. I forgot about that. Oh, I forgot about that whole pet eating thing. It's unbelievable and so absurd. But this is the whole point. You see, the mainstream press, as it's referred to, can point at Elon Musk and the things that are being spread on his platform, quote unquote, as something that is very dangerous. Look at what it's leading to. It's leading to immigrants being treated so poorly, being told that they're eating pets, and people are calling in bomb threats and maybe actually wanting to bring real bombs into the situation. Maybe they want to shoot the president or somebody else. I mean, you can see how they're priming you for violence just with all of the stories that are going on. All of these alleged assassination attempts against Donald Trump. They're priming you to accept violence that we have been sort of immune from for a while in the United States of America. I mean, the last time a president was shot at was Reagan, if I remember correctly, and that was in the 80s. Oh, I don't know why I had this picture up. It's a painting of George Bush. And the audacity of it just makes me laugh. It's not funny, but their audacity is hilarious to me, in hindsight. Where you have this picture of George Bush playing with 2 paper airplanes and 2 destroyed Jenga towers. Just showing you that they knew about 9/11 beforehand, that they knew this would be the president who was in office when they did this, and I should fact check myself. I can't remember where I got this from, but I'm almost positive that it was before 9/11 that this was painted. And the point is, if they're painting something like this before 9/11, the same thing's going on with Donald Trump right now. You just can't see it because you're in the moment with it. It'll only become obvious in hindsight, like this painting is so obvious in hindsight. This is Elon Musk in his dark MAGA gear, and he's always making these ridiculous faces and doing these ridiculous jumps on stage, and that's all a part of the game, right? That's the persona he's trying to craft in the mind, where, oh, I'm this crazy, wild, loose cannon who's lost his mind, and I run X, where all this hate and misinformation is promoted. So they're creating that view of him in your mind by him acting like this. Elon Musk has been in regular contact with Putin for 2 years, says report. So hopefully you can see now how they're tying in Elon Musk with the Trump Russia narrative that they've been working on for almost a decade now, where they've associated Trump with Putin and Russia, and they give that talking point to the other side and give them all this evidence, allegedly, that says, hey, look, he has all these relations with Russia. And that's all a part of the misinformation thing where they give you the paper trail to a foreign adversary that makes it more obvious in a normal person's eyes that, yeah, actually, I think the First Amendment does go too far. I think we need to limit the things you can say on the internet because we have these foreign countries that are spreading misinformation and destabilizing our country, or at least trying to. We got to do something about this. And these guys, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, these billionaires, they're letting it happen. We need to censor what's going on here. And ironically enough, Russia just recently banned Discord's chat program. And I say ironically enough because they give the other side these talking points about Russia and how it's trying to destabilize us and how they're fascists somehow or something along those lines. I don't think people even understand what words mean anymore, but they use the words. And, they point their finger at Russia as being this tyrannical regime or, whatever. However they spin it. And then they want to do the same thing that Russia is doing in terms of banning speech, right? If they had their way, they would just ban X, or they would ban 4chan, or whatever website you can imagine along those lines that's saying things that they've been programmed to think are wrong because they're not capable of original thought. They just repeat. And we all do that. I did it when I was younger too, before I knew any of this, but Russia just straight up banned Discord chat from the country, and that's what they want to do as well. But at the same time, they're pointing their finger like, look, these Russians are trying to influence our country and destabilize it. No. We want to ban the speech that's letting them do that in the same way they're doing it in their country. It doesn't make any sense. But people don't think about these things long enough to notice the logical inconsistencies with this type of thing. So anyway, not an accident that Elon Musk is now being associated with Putin in Russia. And then going back to the violence thing, there was this story about the FBI arresting an Afghan man who officials say was planning an election day attack. Again, priming you for violence in a political sense surrounding elections. And that is very clearly trying to destabilize the country and our faith in the institutions that we used to have. And then this is just a search, Joe Rogan misinformation. Joe Rogan is a drop in the ocean of medical misinformation. Remember, he was really in the media's crosshairs during the pandemic because of what they were allowed to say on his podcast as it related to COVID and the whole thing. And he had all these articles and controversy surrounding him. So I hope you see how he was playing that role, and it was only natural to eventually bring him and all of his listeners into the Donald Trump umbrella in a very official way, which they achieved through the podcast on October 25th. In other words, you blast it out right in everyone's face eventually. You have your agents come on the scene and pretend to be telling the truth about certain things, but really they're a part of the establishment as it exists, and they claim to be in favor of free speech, but they're being used knowingly to eventually censor it. Because as the representative of it, something will be done in their name and the movement they created that will necessitate it no longer existing. And they willingly and knowingly go along with that. As they say to your face, I'm for you. That's the game of politics since its inception, right? Nothing new there. But you gotta see how that game is being played with the quote-unquote truth on the internet and how they have created it from its inception to turn into this. The 9/11 truth movement was created as a part of 9/11. It wasn't something that organically sprung into existence. Maybe little parts of it did with people who were directly affected by it, and they were legitimate in their way, but they were subsumed within the artificial infrastructure that was designed to make sure nothing came of it. And they knew eventually, knowing Donald Trump was the twin of 9/11, that the 9/11 truth movement would eventually merge into MAGA and that whole movement. And it would eventually be mainstream in a way that it was talked about and known about by everyone so that it could eventually be censored. This is the game. And as a part of that, we got to tie in these hurricanes that recently transpired, where you have the Rolling Stone rolling with the headline, meteorologists get death threats as Hurricane Milton conspiracy theories thrive. You have this very obvious mainstream promotion of the idea that they can create the weather, and this is just another thing they add to the list. Oh my gosh. Look at what these crazy Republicans inspired by Donald Trump and misinformation are saying on the internet. They're saying that they can create hurricanes. They're saying that they intentionally did this to these people. Look how crazy these guys are. This is out of control disinformation and misinformation. We got to do something about this. Meteorologists are getting death threats. Come on, guys. And this is directly related to that from Reddit. Why are all conspiracies seemingly only committed by the left Democrats? Is the left the only side that is evil now? Well, of course not, but that's the way that they did it on purpose to create this atmosphere where it's the same old left versus right thing, except now it includes conspiracy theories. Now you have all these fake, embellished conspiracy theories that have kernels of truth but aren't really what it is. And that's what's promoted out there, and it all artificially blames the left as if they're the ones doing it, right? The Democrats behind Pizzagate and all that thing that's going on, they're the ones that do it, not the other side, right? So they paint it in this left-right way to, again, maintain that divide and then eventually censor it, because this will be very mainstream what happens, in the same way that January 6th was very mainstream. And that started the process of creating this paper trail in the history books that will sell this plausible story of the rise of the new Hitler for the 21st century and what we eventually had to do based on what was allowed to happen because we didn't stop it when it was going on. Oh yeah, this is Elon Musk doing his little dance here, just looking absolutely ridiculous. But this picture really says it all. I mean, this was a decade in the making. This stage that they share here. The New York Times has been able to confirm coordination between the Trump campaign and Elon Musk's Twitter, exposing what may be the largest election interference scheme in history. And this is something they put out there so both sides will have the talking points after the election, where the mainstream conspiracy theory Republican side invariably are going to say that the election was rigged and they cheated. And then the other side, no matter what happens, will be able to say, oh my gosh, look what Donald Trump and Elon Musk did using Twitter to do the same thing that they're accusing us of doing with the ballots and all of that stuff. These are the unresolvable talking point matrices that they create, where there is no resolution that can be had when you're arguing these talking points. You just scream at each other, and that's what they want, And here's more priming of the violence thing in the collective mind. Scarred by violence, lawmakers plan for possible mass casualty event. Congress must ensure it can continue to govern in the aftermath of mass violence, a bipartisan group of House members argues. Oh, speaking of controlled opposition, here we have Tucker Carlson and Russell Brand LARPing as Catholics or supporters of Jesus. The whole thing with the fake baptism that Russell Brand did here and Christ chooses us, that whole thing. And I have a picture that I want to get to along those lines. But first, I should say, a big part of this mainstreaming of fake conspiracy culture is the fake Christianity element of it. And this has been going on for a long time, where you had the evangelical right in the United States of America that was eventually merged into the Republican Party, and it became synonymous with religion. And this is a big part of the way that they drive young people away from being conservative, because they think, oh man, these people actually believe in religion. I don't believe in religion. I can't be one of those people. And then vice versa, right? The other side says, oh my gosh, look at these people on the left. They have no morals at all. They have no faith in their life. They're atheists and completely lost and just debaucherous. I can't believe anything that they say, or I can't support anything that they might support. And you have this fundamental divide there that is being continued just on a deeper level now, where you have the deep state controlled by these evil entities behind the scenes that represents the left. And then you have this fake Christianity, fake virtuous controlled opposition on the right that tries to take the moral high ground and say, oh yeah, we're chosen by God and I support Jesus and the whole thing, right? And it's just a newer version of that divide that's giving you this fake spiritual war going on. And I have this picture of the man they called Jesus up here, which obviously is nothing like that man would have looked like. I mean, this is the picture of a magician, not Jesus, not the actual incarnation of God on earth. Do you think the incarnation of God on earth would be making this hand sign? Do you think it would have all of this stuff going on up here? Do you think it would even be dressed like this? No, this is their version of it. This is the version of Jesus that Russell Brand and Tucker Carlson and all their guests are talking about when they say, Christ chooses us. That being never would have called himself Christ in the first place anyway. But this is who they're talking about. They're not talking about the actual being that Jesus was, or, whoever they call that being, whatever name they give to it. That's not what it was. It wasn't this. All these pictures they have of him in the churches all across the world, that's not who he was, okay? But that's the version that they have created, the fake version that fits so nicely into this fake conspiracy scene. And then the mainstreaming by characters like Russell Brand of that fake conspiracy thing to the masses. And a fundamental aspect of that is this fake worship of Jesus. I mean, they don't represent it in any way, shape, or form, but they claim it because it's a part of the larger agenda and this whole fake awakening that people are having as a part of this agenda. Because a part of the script is learning that there are forces beyond what you thought in control of this world, because subconsciously that creates the conditions for a world governmental structure. Because if you subconsciously accept that you've always been controlled by forces larger than just your individual town, city, or country, then you naturally have already accepted the idea in principle that you should be ruled by some kind of world government or person, council, however they shape it. And that's why the fake conspiracy culture existed in the first place, to reveal this stuff on purpose so everyone would become aware of it in some way, even if it's in the fake way that they give it to you on X or any of the other places that people like this talk. They had to give that to you so that the majority of people would at least be aware of it enough to assimilate it, so that eventually down the line, there will be no resistance to world government, which is the plan. And it's so funny how it works, right? Because you'll have these sources on the internet exposing the Vatican and everything that the Vatican has done and everything that's going on in the Catholic Church. And then in the next breath, they will tell you to join the Eastern Orthodox Church, as if that is in any way, shape, or form different fundamentally from what is going on at the Vatican. It's all the same thing. Some may be better than the others. There's degrees to it, I'm sure. Some are closer to the truth, but you gotta understand this propaganda has to function in layers because some people are just more intuitive than others and they're gonna see through more than others. So you have to have things that are really, really, really close to the truth to catch that, top 5% of individuals who are gonna see through the most. But anyway, I got into this in a prior video about how there are no known images of this guy, and yet they have no shortage of images of him, right? Like, this is not who he was or what he embodied. I should use the phrase it there because it's more than he, but you get what I'm saying. Oh, this is back to Hurricane Helene. Officials face anti-Semitic attacks over Hurricane Helene response. And ultimately, that's going to tie into this Donald Trump thing as well, as I got into in the Rise of Christian Nationalism video, where what's going on in Israel will be supported by Donald Trump. He's already said he is Israel's biggest supporter. So whatever they have going on right now, if he is president in 2025, he's going to fully support it. And so you can see how maybe that is the plan all along, is when he comes back into his second term, he's there to allow further expansion in the Middle East based on what they have already started. And then the other side, the left in America that has been programmed with all these ideas about white nationalists and colonialism, the colonizers, as they say, they're already anti-Israel. They're already protesting in favor of Palestine. And that this will only feed that further for a whole 4 years if Donald Trump is president. In many ways, it'll go back to like it was in the early 2000s when the left was sort of the anti-war party speaking out against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that George W. Bush on the right had started. Now, of course, we know they're all working together to start these wars, wherever they start. But back then, if you weren't aware of that, you didn't know, you just said, I know this war shouldn't be happening. And you point at the guy with the R next to his name and say, oh yeah, it's them. It's the neocons. They're the ones doing it. I'm on this good side. I'm going to oppose the war. And it might revert to that for 4 years, where it's the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian movement that's already been in existence since this thing with Gaza started. And it will only be amplified by their derangement with Trump and what they think he's going to do to them. And you could see how they could create J6 style events with that reaction over those 4 years. Or they could do the opposite, where they have Kamala Harris be the president, and then it's the reaction to all the internet stuff, which will say the election was stolen, and they could easily sell a bigger J6 type of event that will be justified, as they will tell it, by the misinformation on the internet. Look, we already saw the first version of this. Totally logical that we would see another more serious version of this now, because they think it's been stolen twice. So they could take it either way they want to, but either way, they can get the outcome that is desired and manipulate you with no problem. But this is a part of the larger censorship agenda here. You can see how mainstreaming the idea of weather manipulation leads to anti-Semitism and threats directed at officials over storm response, where you have all of these stories coming out about what's going on in Asheville, North Carolina, and what the officials there are doing. And that similarly is justifying a response that they could just stage at some point, or they could convince some patsy to do, right? You don't have to stage it. You just find some naive, ideologically driven person, which is what all the honeypots are for in the first place. You convince them to do something, you supply them with everything, and then you catch them. And then the FBI says, look, we're doing our job, you know? But in doing that, they provide the narrative going forward that they need for censorship. And that's why it's allowed to happen. But along those lines, it just came out in an official publication a couple weeks ago. Christopher Columbus was secretly Jewish. New DNA study reveals the 15th century explorer was a Sephardic Jew from Western Europe, Spanish DNA experts reveal. Now, think about why this would come out now. Remember the narrative about the pro-Palestinian protesters and what they believe about colonizers and what they think these white men colonizers are doing in Israel. And then it comes out that Christopher Columbus was actually Jewish. And this is all by design, I guarantee, because it increases the idea that anti-Semitism is on the rise, because people are going to run with things like this and say, oh, look, even Christopher Columbus was Jewish. They've been doing it for centuries. The colonizers. And this is just one other thing they can add to it. And then they run with headlines like anti-Semitism and threats directed at officials over storm response, or officials face anti-Semitic attacks over Hurricane Helene response. They can say that anti-Semitism is at an all-time high, and that is all a part of adding to the umbrella that will eventually censor speech, right? Because you have all these different examples that can cover what can be said. Well, that's hate over there. That's misinformation over there. That's white nationalist talk over there. No, we can't have that. Nope. Oh, all this big umbrella. We're going to cover all of that. Can't say any of this. Oh, and then this is from Reddit. What's going on with weather conspiracies? I am hearing that Republicans are saying the government or Democrats control the weather and caused Hurricane Helene. Now, just think about how absurd this is, as if one side of the government would be so much further advanced than the other side of the government that they would be able to control the weather, and the other side would not be. Like, that's just patently absurd, right? But these people don't think along those lines because, to my point, they're so deep within the left-right divide, they see through that lens that the propaganda works. Where they can actually say that this is one side or the other, you know? And it's like, no, if that technology exists, it exists beyond political parties, right? This is something that exists within the military or organizations that have black budgets that we don't even know about. That would be who has the ability to manipulate the weather, and it would have nothing to do with anything that's going on here. But I hope you see how this discredits it. Because somebody reads something like this and they think, oh, that's just so ridiculous. Come on. They can't control the weather. If this is what people who say that might be possible are saying, I can't believe that. And that's how they do it. It's the same game played with every talking point. That's the whole point of manufacturing your controlled opposition that talks about things in this absurd way. It's so you simultaneously discredit it while at the same time giving the excuse to censor it. Misinformation is hurting Hurricane Helene reliefs. This is the American Red Cross using that term misinformation and highlighting it in terms of hurting, right? Priming the mind for the inevitability of misinformation hurting people. We went through it with COVID, where it was leading to deaths. We went through it with January 6th, where it led to an insurrection. On and on it goes. And, you know, whatever they have planned next, we will see the same narrative until eventually they'll come out with whatever the Patriot Act 2.0 is that says, hey, this is the new Internet Bill of Rights, and this is what you're allowed to do, and this is what you're not allowed to do. We're getting rid of the First Amendment. It's outdated. It's from colonizers who lived in a different time. You know, something along those lines. Oh yeah, this gets back to the religion thing. A rally goer at Kamala Harris's event shouted, "Jesus is Lord," to which Harris responded, "Oh, I think you're at the wrong rally." So really think about that, how they've divided people where you just can't be religious if you are on this one side, and you're only allowed to be that if you're on the other side. Like, you can't have faith of any kind along the lines that relates to Jesus if you're with me. And that's so ridiculous, right? But that is the state of the human mind in the United States of America, and really most of the world, but especially here, it's so childish and lacks nuance. It's just so easy to manipulate people. They're so dumbed down that they can't understand what's going on. They're easily manipulated by something like this, where then on the flip side, J.D. Vance comes out and says Jesus is king days after Kamala Harris mocked Christian protesters. And Jesus is king is known as a quote-unquote dog whistle for white nationalists and anti-Semitics. And it's prevalent on 4chan and other places. And so you see my point here. They further merge Vance and Trump with 4chan, with X, with Elon Musk, the mainstreaming of all these things that will eventually result in censorship. FEMA says its disaster assistance teams will be at fixed locations after National Guard troops reportedly encountered armed militia who said they were hunting FEMA. So now you have this idea that these domestic terrorists, these MAGA-inspired individuals, fueled by misinformation on the internet from all the usual suspects, like X and 4chan now, are hunting FEMA. They're hunting government officials. Putting that out there. Again, the violence, getting people used to this type of thing. This kind of civil war mentality. Priming people for that. And then again, you have Donald Trump with a quote relating to an archangel, you know, pretending to be on the side of God. Guarantee you, he's not on the same side you're thinking. Probably not. Because again, this is who Donald Trump is. Back to the future. He is the twin of 9/11, planned since his birth, whether you want to believe it or not. So, that's it. I'll leave it there. Later.